All right. So let me introduce Steven. Steven is on the Angular team. Actually, I think Steven will introduce himself even better. You want to do that?
Sure. So, my name is Stephen Fluent. I'm a developer advocate on the Angular team at Google. I work out of the Mountain View office. My role on the Angular team is kind of twofold. First, my mission is to help developers and businesses be successful with Angular. And second is to understand what it's like building software in the real world so that we can reflect those needs on the Angular team. What that ends up boiling down to on a day-to-day basis is a number of things. So I write content for our blog, I speak at events, I manage enterprise relationships, I lead our GDE program, and a number of other things related to kind of partnerships, community, and really just helping developers be successful in any way I can.
Cool. So Steven, the best question is getting an Angular Werewolf game, so you'll have to choose the best question.
Okay.
All right. Who has questions? All right. Okay, we have Roman has a question.
What is the destiny of Angular Universal?
What was the what of Angular Universal?
The destiny. Looks like it's outdated. It's not supported anymore.
That is absolutely not the case. So I actually was just at Node Summit giving a talk on Angular Universal today. So I'll try to just give you the thumbnail of that talk instead of doing the whole talk. So Angular Universal, for those of you that don't know, is the project that we have that enables server-side rendering of Angular. So instead of the application running entirely on the client side, we can run it first on the server side, generate a full set of HTML, and then ship that down to the browser before you bootstrap the dynamic client-side application on top of it. For those of you who don't know, Angular Universal actually started as a community project, and then with version 4 of Angular, we took it over as kind of a core baked into Angular thing, where now most of the code actually lives in Platform Server. And then, so that's been there since version 4 in March, and just last week we released RC0 of the Angular CLI 1.3, so 1.3.0-rc.0, which for the first time now includes built-in support for Platform Server. So you can now have a normal app module that was built by the Angular CLI, and then on top of that you can put create an app server module that imports your app module and then gives you basically the ability to bundle to CommonJS instead of UMD in a way that you can load that natively in Node just via a require statement. And then we have a method called render module factory that will take that module, the URL that the user wants, the index HTML that you want to bootstrap, and then render that, both load, run, and then render that finalized application to a string that you can then serve down to the user and then bootstrap on top of. So Angular Universal is alive and well, spending a lot of time thinking about it, and really just focusing on making it easier. So everything that you've needed to do it has been there since 4, and now we've baked into the CLI, so that's coming out soon, and now it's just all about making it easier and helping developers get started with it.
Awesome. Roman is getting an Angular speaker. Who else has questions? All right. Michael.
Hi there. My name is Michael. I hope you don't mind me putting you kind of on the spot because it's about a few different things, but I'm going to try to consolidate my questions as much as possible.
Okay.
I've been trying to use the Angular Fire 2 library, and the issue that I'm coming with the Angular Fire 2 library is we're trying to use the NGPWA tools, which does some pre-rendering of the app shell. I end up getting thrown in errors saying when I import the Angular Fire 2 module, it says that it's an undefined import into my arguments, and I can't run anything with Angular. Well, I can't do anything with the app shell with the Angular Fire 2 module. And I'm assuming that if I was using Angular Universal, I'd run into similar issues with the app shell. From what I understand, is built or using the same tools as Universal. Is this an issue you guys are aware of? And is there any plans to resolve that?
So this is a very specific issue which we might have to dig into after this call, but I'll call out a couple of things that I know. So NGPWA tools was an experimental project that eventually will be baked into the CLI. One of the known issues with it is if you try using it when you don't have any lazy loaded routes, it won't work. So do you have lazy loaded routes in your application?
Yes, all my routing is lazy loaded.
Okay. So then ngpwa tools should work, and I don't know why you're having import problems. If you either want to file a bug on the GitHub repo, we can take a look at it that way, or you could shoot me an email and we could chat further about that one.
What question? Report the issue to ngpwa tools or to the Angular Fire?
Say it again?
Should I report the issue to the ngpwa tools or to the Angular Fire?
Probably report it in ngpwa tools, because I've seen Angular Fire work in almost every case, so it sounds like a deficit on the ngpwa tools side of things.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
If he files a bug, maybe he gets another sticker.
Hi, my name's Ron. I have a question. I'm from Angular JS, so I know the basic scope, things like that. But I don't know much about Angular. So is that beneficial for me to learn Angular, or is there performance difference or other features that Angular JS is out there? Or if I learn Angular, what do I do to study and how can I study teaching?
Okay. So you're saying you have an AngularJS background and you're wondering, should I learn Angular? Why should I learn Angular? And what could I look at to kind of make the transition? Is that all right? Okay. So I'll dive in a little bit to the background, which I think is a little bit helpful. So we built Angular a little bit under the radar, right? So the team started the project in about 2009, and we ended up being able to build it very naturally, very organically, right? So we would ship something, a few more people would try it would get better, a few more people would try it would get better, and then a few years later, suddenly we had kind of millions of developers writing in AngularJS. And what ended up happening was we hit a point where most developers were hitting kind of foot guns that existed in AngularJS that there was no way for us to fix at scale for everyone. So for example, the digest cycle in AngularJS, it's basically we look at the state of the page as it is, and we run change detection on everything, or we run all of your expressions and we see if anything changed. And then we run it again and see if anything changed. And we run it over and over until the application is done changing. Which means that if you have 1,000 things on the page that are nested, we can end up running change detection many, many times, which causes lots of problems. I think I've lost the connection, possibly? You can still hear me, I just can't see you. Okay, I will keep going then. And so this was, I think it was about 2013? About the team decided they needed to rewrite, and so they rewrote into Angular from AngularJS into Angular, and as part of doing that, they simplified basically everything, because the web in 2013, 2014, and even today is a very different place than what we had in 2009. And so Angular itself is actually much simpler than AngularJS in a lot of different ways in terms of the number of directives, the number of concepts, etc. But Angular today is more dependent on the modern web. Right? So we're using Webpack, we're using TypeScript, because these things offer us much cleaner capabilities. Right? If you remember in AngularJS, you had problems like, oh, in my controllers, let me declare all my dependencies first as strings, and then I can give them variable names, and we had to match that up. We were doing kind of very dirty things as part of AngularJS that now we don't have to do anymore. Now in Angular, when you use type or dependency injection, we can use the type, and you can actually do an explicit import and say, hey, this is the object I want, give me this exact thing identified by this type. So Angular is cleaner in a ton of different ways. Part of my role, so that's kind of some of the background. So in general, yes, I think AngularJS was awesome. Angular is even better in terms of the way that it allows you to build highly maintainable, highly performing applications that are great user experiences, that are good for teams that want to write good software. The thing I'll say is I work with a lot of our educators. So these are companies that teach Angular, and they train individuals that are getting up to speed. So whether they're coming from AngularJS or other backgrounds, they often go through educators. And what we saw in the beginning was about half of the developers that were learning Angular were coming from AngularJS, but the other half were coming from more traditional backend technologies like Java and .NET. And this is something I hear very often, and it's a very common thing where developers come to Angular and they're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense because it matches a full kind of application development paradigm. Whereas AngularJS was a little bit more, I'm going to start with an HTML page, a static HTML page, and I'm going to start making it a little bit more dynamic. So there's a little bit of a mentality shift. But philosophically, we still have almost everything that we had in AngularJS. So we have declarative templates, we have dependency injection, we have a services layer. And if you're doing AngularJS in kind of the right way, using components, all of those models transfer perfectly. And actually working with our educator partners, I've seen a resurgence of there's actually more developers now coming from AngularJS, because I think they all looked at Angular and said, oh, I don't know what to do with this. I'm going to wait and see what the community does. But I think the community response has been really, really positive. Lots and lots of people are picking up Angular, building applications, shipping in production. And so it's kind of now been proven to be safe and a good idea in a lot of ways. And so we're now seeing a lot of AngularJS applications either being updated via a tool we released called ng Upgrade that lets you bootstrap both of these at the same time. So you can combine AngularJS and Angular services, components, routes, all those sorts of kind of complex things. You can have them at the same time if you have a large application, you need to do that. But we also see a lot of people just rewriting. So it does depend on you. So your skills are still valid. If you are taking advantage of Angular, you're basically 90% of that is learning what the modern web is today in terms of minification, bundling, lazy loading, code splitting, all these kind of advanced strategies that you could have done in AngularJS, but they're very hard. We've now made them easy if you just learn kind of the web as it is. And I think it would be good for your users and for your team to try out Angular. Did I answer the question? Good, thank you.
Whoever can guess what one is gated. More questions? I have a question. What's your favorite Angular feature?
What's my favorite V5 feature? Well, we just started V5. So some people are a little bit confused by our beta structure. So what we announced back a while ago now was that we're switching to semantic versioning, which means that every basically week we're going to release a patch, and then for the first 3 months of a major cycle, we're going to release a minor about once a month. So that's like the X.1 or X.2, and then there's going to be about a 3-month period where we're working on the next version. So we just started, we finished up version 4.3. That was the last minor, and now we're working towards version 5, which is the next major. So there aren't any features in V5 yet. I mean, we have lots of really good plans. One of our headlines that we've got for 5 that we're really trying to hold the whole team to is faster, smaller, easier to use. And so we're looking at kind of every piece of how developers use Angular and saying, okay, how do we make it faster? So everything from build time down to kind of running time, so runtime, change detection, all those sorts of things. How do we make it smaller? Because that's actually a big deal for users in terms of the bundle size, especially if you're in markets with less reliable or slower internet connections or expensive internet connections. And then lastly is easier to use, right? So looking at the ergonomics of the platform. So one thing, this isn't a V5 feature, but it was a V4 3 feature, was the new HTTP client. And so we used to have a service called HTTP, and now we have one called HTTP client, which is the new one. And it's better in kind of a number of different ways. It's smaller, so less code, so bundle size is smaller. It's more ergonomic because now you can actually just give us a type, for example, and we'll return to you an object of that type, which is kind of really, really nice. We've gotten rid of the need to map to JSON because now we default to JSON because that's what most developers want. And it's more powerful because we've added features like interceptors. So you can say, hey, every time a request comes in, automatically respond with this extra header information or these cookies, or do this other thing as part of the HTTP call. So that was my favorite part of 4.3. and we'll see what makes it into 5.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I'm writing my master's thesis about future-friendly software development, and I plan to write my application in Angular. I have the question, is there any reason why this would not be a good choice for a future-friendly application to use Angular?
What does future-friendly mean?
I don't know that it works. My task is that it works as long as possible without payments. And to find out strategies how this could be possible. It's never be future-friendly, but
So maybe I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing. So future-friendly meaning I write code that's going to last a long time, or future-friendly meaning like it's easy for beginner developers to get up to speed on, or which? The first one. Okay, so I mean, in general, the nice thing about open source is that we can never take anything away from you, right? Like the code you write in AngularJS today, the code you write in Angular tomorrow, that code is going to keep working exactly as you wrote it because you have the full source code. What I'll say is that all of Angular, and we're really spending a lot of time and a lot of energy on this, is making sure that you're able to stay as up to date as possible. So we don't ever want to rewrite the framework like we did between AngularJS and Angular. So we will never be doing that again. And we actually want to go further, which is that with every major release, every 6 months, we want to be giving you tools that help you stay up to date. So this doesn't exist today, but we're definitely talking about a future where you can just run ng update. It will download the latest patches, the latest features, make any changes to your application as necessary, and then you can just keep working and focusing on your application. Because from some levels, you kind of want to stop thinking about Angular, right? You want to start thinking, or you want to just spend all of your time thinking about your application and not the framework. And so we're very cognizant of that, and we want to empower you to do that while still taking advantage of kind of the evolution of the web. So I feel like Angular is a very future forward-looking framework that is going to make transitions easy going forward.
Last question. Wait, do less.
Hey, how you doing? Dan, real quick. That was sort of migrating from 1 to 2. The application completely rewrote it to have some things having to do with forms. Look up the docs, sort of see the Angular one way of doing forms, or if you dig a little deeper, there's React. I really like it. I think it's a lot simpler than the old way. But it seems like a lot of people don't know about it, or people don't use it. I mean, this is going back a couple months ago, so maybe it's changed. But is that basically like the standard way of doing it?
So there's lots of different developers at different places on their kind of learning journey when it comes to reactive programming. And so we've left traditional kind of ng model style forms into Angular because that's where a lot of developers are comfortable today. I would say reactive forms are more powerful, and we want to help people get there. But as kind of throughout all of Angular, we're in a lot of discussions about how do we make Angular easier to learn by minimizing the number of concepts you have to take on at the beginning while still giving you all the power. And so that's kind of why we've ended up where we are today. So it sounds like you feel like reactive forms are more powerful, which is good. Do you also feel like they were required? Did you have to go learn them to get started?
No, I just I always thought that form handling in Angular was the thing. So I think just perusing the docs, I see reactive forms. And I find it much more intuitive than it used to be. My only question is like, I'm not sure what we're missing from it. Like it seems like much more doable.
No. So reactive forms are more powerful in general, and they're actually going to become even more powerful soon. One of the features that one of our engineers is working on that she announced at ngconf is, for example, enhanced chain validators. So you can use a sequence of observables to manage validation of form controls and form groups. So that you could do something like, for example, do a synchronous check to say, does this control have the right number of characters? And if it does, then we're going to call it to a server that says, is this username available? And then if it is available, then we're going to call it to a different server and say, is this on some blacklist somewhere? And then all of those things that would actually have like 3 emissions that would say, first, it's valid. Second, it's really valid. Third, it's really, really valid, right? And then you can decide how to render that however you want. So they are more powerful. We have talked to a lot of developers that just stick with template-driven forms because they find the mental model easier. So I'm glad you found it intuitable and it's straightforward from the docs. And I'd love to see you share that with the world.
Thanks, Dan. And the last question from Tessa.
Hi. So this is a very common question that I get asked a lot, but I was wondering what you would find to be the most powerful argument to convince people to switch to Angular or
I'm sorry, I can't hear. It's all muffled. I don't know if you're farther away from the mic or something. The mic for the laptop, not the mic for the room.
Can you hear me?
Yes, if you can, yes, I can hear you. It's just a little muffled, so speak up a little bit.
Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Great, awesome. So what I wanted to know is, what do you find to be the most powerful arguments to convince people to either try Angular or switch to Angular? And I'm asking this because I get asked this a lot. I figured if you're evangelist, that's really good steps away.
Sure. So you've asked what's the reason why Angular effectively? And instead of what's that?
What's your strongest argument?
Well, can I give you 5?
Sure.
So the 5 that are my personal go-tos are, number 1, Angular is opinionated. When you choose to start using Angular, we're going to give you a set of things that are kind of out of the box, all going to work together, right? Angular Material keeps up to date with Angular. We've got RxJS built in. We've got zones for change detection. We've got an HTTP library. We've got all these really powerful tools like the CLI that have all been tested together that are all intended to work together. That's not to say we don't give you the freedom and flexibility to swap in other things, but our opinionated nature really simplifies a lot of the developer kind of difficulties of, okay, now let's go pick a library and the 70 things that are going to work with that library. Second, I would say Angular is familiar. So as I talked about before, we've got a lot of developers coming from AngularJS, as well as a lot of developers coming from things like C# or Java, where the Angular constructs and paradigms that we have today are very familiar because we've got a typed language we can write in. We've got an application-centric architecture, component architecture that is very familiar to them. So it's very recognizable when you start getting into, you're kind of used to these concepts already. We talk about Angular being trustworthy, and we mean that from the standpoint of back at the 2.0 launch in September of 2016, we made a set of promises about our release cadence. We made a set of promises about how breaking future changes are going to be. And I think everyone has been very pleased with us having stuck to that, right? So we're doing the releases when we say we are, so you can plan for them, you can expect them. We are doing regular patches to really try and balance the stability with the evolution of the framework and give people the features and the capabilities they want at the right time. We talk about Angular being scaled. So there's 200 plus applications within Google that actually use Angular that we've already validated it for. Every commit that we make into the product is actually already validated across all of Google because we have a one version policy, which means that any change we make automatically gets run across all of the projects that are dependent on us. And if we break them, we have to fix them. So we actually, before we do any sort of release, all of Google's already using the latest version of Angular. We also target being scaled because of our the way we architect things into just components, styles, templates, things like that. We found that there's a lot of opportunities for developers or for teams to split the different roles of a project in different ways based on the capabilities of the team members. So for example, if you think about ng modules, This is often an archetype type person is thinking, okay, how should our application flow, right? Where are lazy loaded boundaries? What are the components? How do they fit together? What do we want in a shared services layer? And then you have things like developers that maybe they're more focused on a component. How should this thing work? You also have things like shared services team. So you have a separate team in the company that says, hey, here's a standardized widget that does X, and we're going to use that across the whole company. And then lastly, we think about things like designers or UX individuals who, most of the time, if they learn a little bit about the template-driven syntax in Angular, they can write and maintain Angular templates without having to jump into the components or map data and things like that. And then
so you got frozen. Can you repeat this phrase?
Designers can use Angular because of our template system. So it's relatively straightforward for a designer or UX engineer to pick up our template syntax and make really impactful UX without having to understand components and TypeScript and all these things. And then the last piece is ecosystem, where we have a huge number of developers building libraries, IDEs, tools that make Angular better and better every day.
Actually, very last question.
How far away is your in the update tool?
How far are we from updating what?
How far from the
That automatically what? I think the microphone's just a long way away.
You said you wanted to make at some point to automatically upgrade your app from.
Oh, so my story about ng update. What I'll say is we are working on a plan for those tools. I can't make any commitment about when they'll land, but I will say we are focused on making 5 as easy a transition as updating to 4 was. So we were almost universally praised for how easy it was to go from version 2 to version 4, and we want the same thing from 4 to 5.
Thank you. What was your favorite question? Something has to get Angular better.
It's hard because there were such good questions. Maybe I have to pick why Angular, because I got to go through 5 answers instead of just 1.
I'm surprised that little cards and stickers weren't 2 of the reasons, 2 of the 5.
Okay, I should have said stickers and more stickers.
Yeah. By the way, we have stickers for everybody, so you can come and grab them. Alright, thanks a lot, Steven. Thanks for your time. Have a good night.
Yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying the meetup. Thanks for having me. Bye.